All right. Hi, John.
Hello, Hooper.
Thanks for calling into the show today.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
I am very welcome. Well said, thank you. I wanted to talk to you about something today. This is a very short podcast. I realized that we had not addressed the Spider-Man casting. So for anyone who has not used the internet except for the podcast app, or YouTube, or Podbean, or Tumblr, or Blogger, or Twitter, or Facebook, all places you can find the HooperCast. Yeah, I've been reading that copy so many times, I've memorized it. They have cast the new Spider-Man, the Spider-Man that will appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and also in the new line of Sony films. And his name is Tom Holland, and he's 19 years old, and he is a Brit. I didn't know this, but I mean, he's replacing Andrew Garfield, who I did not realize was 31 years old. He's 31.
Andrew Garfield was 12 when this kid was born.
I know, yeah, that's it's crazy. Andrew Garfield was almost Peter Parker's age when the new Peter Parker was born.
Yeah.
So, I had a couple of opinions about his casting, and I wanted you to share your thoughts with me as well. This kid, I'm happy for a couple reasons. He's 19, so he's not too far away from the actual age of Peter Parker. He looks pretty young and could convincingly play a high school kid for a number of years. He's got acting experience. He was in that movie, The Impossible, that flood movie with Naomi Watts and Ewan McGregor. I say that flood movie. I mean, that movie about the tsunami.
That flood movie.
Yeah, he was in that flood movie. But so he's got the experience, but he's not, you had to Google him because I didn't know who he was. So that's also good that I didn't immediately know who he was. So he's not gonna stick out like a sore thumb in terms of that kid is an actor playing Spider-Man, so he's got that relatability. I'm prejudiced. I'll admit that I'm prejudiced against him because he's British. And so that's an extra hurdle for him to have to, that's an extra layer of acting there. You could argue a layer and a half or 2 layers of acting because he's going to have to work with a dialect coach because this kid's supposed to be from New York. And also just more broadly, America. And I, for one, I can hear it when they can't pull off the accent. And it's going to really bother me, as it always has, if this kid who's supposed to be from, New England is from Old England. So, so I'm a little bit wary of that. But have you seen these Instagram videos of this kid?
I haven't.
If you go online and you Google Tom Holland, there are Instagram videos of him doing all this acrobatic stuff. Like apparently this kid's the real deal in terms of like being able to do flips and do that thing where you run up a wall and you do a backflip, and he can do those crazy World Cup soccer kicks.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that's one of the things that sealed the deal over other people. Because Dustin and I thought it'd be Asa Butterfield.
I think everyone did.
Yeah, but it's going to be this kid, and I'm wondering if these videos had something to do with it because he can pull off the stunt work, and so I'm wondering if they were thinking like, we can do some of these stunts without the mask, and that's valuable. And they're thinking about his ability to do some of his own stuff in camera, which would be really cool.
Sure.
And he apparently did well with the screen test with Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, and he is reportedly being rushed off to Atlanta so he can go ahead and film his part in Civil War.
Right.
So before they do the new solo film, I've been blabbing about him for a little bit, but do you have any thoughts about his casting aside from my own?
Yeah, I think I've never seen him act before. I've never seen him in a movie, and so I can't judge him on his acting ability or how well that'll translate to the character. But looks-wise, I think he really looks like Peter Parker should look. He looks young. He looks like a kid that could realistically be in high school.
Yeah.
Unlike Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, who didn't look super old, but didn't realistically look like they were in high school. So I think on that end, they did a really good good job, and obviously he can look that way for a while since he is still a teenager. So if he's attached to, a string of films, he will age, but not to a point where it's going to be jarring if you see him. Yeah, like I said, I haven't seen him act, but I think Marvel does a really good job with casting, and especially if they screen tested him with the other actors, they're confident that he can pull it off. And I read he was the only one that screen tested with Chris Evans.
Really?
And I think that they screen tested a couple of them with Robert Downey Jr. and then only him with Chris Evans. So obviously by that time they kind of had him in mind already. But, with the action thing, to varying degrees of success, actors have pulled that off. I don't think they would have cast it if they felt that it wasn't convincing, but you never know,
I think they would have. I don't think it's a big deal in their minds. It's almost like
maybe.
it's almost like if you're all in like a room and then one of you in the room goes, "Do you hear that clicking noise?" and everyone else goes, "No." What are you talking about?
Right.
I think it's a lot like that. I don't know if Kevin Feige is hyper vigilant when it comes to regional dialects or not.
Yeah. Apparently, he was handpicked by Kevin Feige.
Wow.
I read as well.
I saw something where like Kevin Feige seemed like he was downplaying like how much control Marvel had over these films, because the person kept asking like, well, how's it feel to have cast a new Spider-Man? He's like, oh, it's good, Sony and us are working real close together, and it's like, so what will be the trajectory of him in the other Marvel films? He goes, well, Sony's going to do he seemed like he was being modest, or he was trying not to say like, yeah, we make all the decisions over here.
Yeah, we're going to do it better.
Yeah, Sony's going to help finance them, but they really screwed the pooch on these.
Right.
Yeah.
And on that note too, I think that this whole build up to this particular iteration of Spider-Man, I think that this will probably be the best iteration that we've seen so far in live action, just because of all the pieces that are coming together.
Yeah.
I think they're going to take the best element from both of the attempts at it, and they know exactly what people want and don't want. Now that the Amazing Spider-Man is over, they've kind of learned from that, I think, and kind of taken what people didn't like about that and realized this doesn't work. And so,
yeah, third time's a charm.
They have what works and what doesn't, and they're going to kind of put it together based on the feedback that the other films got. So, there's a good chance that this could be the best Spider-Man iteration we've seen.
Well,
I think that's likely.
When you shit the bed twice, I mean,
right.
Are you going to shit the bed a third time, or is it more likely statistically that you'll succeed?
Right. And Spider-Man 3, which I like, but a lot of people didn't like.
Right.
So, you could throw that in as well, but.
Qual, I'm speaking more to like the trajectory the studios were taking it, more than like I don't mean like when I'm referring to the first trilogy, I don't think they're bad films. I'm more referring to the fact that that Sony was like, hey, we're gonna do all this stuff, and Sam Raimi was like, and then they decided to start over.
Right.
So I do think Sony is what was wrong with the first two trilogies, especially the second one. Good Lord. I didn't even see The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And I thought the trailer looked good, and I thought the costume looked good. Dustin saw it, and he was like, don't bother.
The costume looked great. Hopefully they carry that type of design over, because that was the best looking one.
I'm sure that will stay. I'm sure Marvel's going to insist that it's as much like the comic book as possible.
Right.
Now, some people are upset because they announced his casting the day after they announced that the Spider-Man in the comics is going to be Miles Morales. And some people were like, well, this is the perfect time to make Miles Morales be the live-action character. How do you feel about that? Do you think they should have done Miles Morales, or what?
I think from a business standpoint, when most people think Spider-Man, they associate that with Peter Parker. I think Miles Morales is still relatively new. He hasn't been around nearly as long as Peter Parker has, so I think that the name recognition of that character is stronger. So it makes perfect sense that they would go with that character and not Miles Morales. But now that the focus is kind of shifted to him in the comics, they could do that in the future. You never know. But I don't think it was like a bad choice or a good choice. I think they went with Peter, and I think that works. I think it could have worked either way, but I think most people would, a lot of people don't read comics anymore, so a lot of people, if you were to ask 10 people on the street who Miles Morales is, chances are really none of them would probably know who he is. The name recognition isn't there, so, give it a few years, maybe the comics catch on, I don't know. Obviously, he's a very popular character, so, but I just don't think he's been around long enough to
be featured.
I don't know how to put it. Yeah, he's just not recognized as much yet because he's so new. I feel like I'd like to see a movie with him too. It's just I understand why they went with Peter because people associate that with that character more. You know what I'm saying?
Especially with how it ties into Civil War, it doesn't make sense for Miles Morales to be part of Civil War.
Right. Yeah. That
because he's not part of the comic book. So maybe that's one reason. But they're also like, look, we haven't really successfully carried out Peter Parker's storyline because Spider-Man 3 didn't really tie things up.
No.
So I mean, they still haven't quite stuck the landing on Peter Parker, and I think until they do, I mean, if they can do that in a couple movies, and then if you want to, kill him and sort of reboot it with Miles Morales, that's fine by me as long as I get a Peter Parker story. But there's no reason to do a Miles Morales story until you've successfully told the story of Peter Parker. I don't know anything about Miles Morales, to be honest, and
I really don't either.
but so therefore I don't really relate to him. But I know Peter Parker, and I want Peter Parker, and I don't know. Look, I'm a young white male, so I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that I want to see a young white male be Spider-Man. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. For me, it's more like you're not done with Peter Parker. You haven't finished with him.
Sure.
So before you start throwing in, it's kind of like with the Green Lantern. Like, if you want to tell the Kyle Rayner story or blah, 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 or why don't you give me either a successful Hal Jordan or John Stewart story before you start telling me who, the fifth guy who's going to be the Green Lantern.
Right.
Or if you're going to do like a Robin movie or Nightwing, like, tell me Dick Grayson's story before you tell me what's-her-face, who is like the fourth Robin.
Sure. I mean, Green Lantern's a good base for this kind of thing because Green Lantern is successful in that it has two different people playing a Green Lantern character. So they've already done kind of what Spider-Man's been doing, and that two people have that mantle of that character.
Yeah.
So with Green Lantern, you could make a movie about either character, and it would work. With this, I feel like Miles Morales is just a little too new to it.
Well, to me,
maybe, like I said, give it a few years and let the character kind of sink in with people more, and kind of establish himself more, and get a few years, few more years under his belt, and then you never know.
Well, he's too new, but also like Spider-Man to me is one of those things that is a freak accident. Like, it makes sense to recast Green Lantern because it's a ring that you give to a person and then they have powers, But Spider-Man's like this freak accident with the spider and the bite and boom, So I already hate the idea of two people being bitten by a spider and having the exact same set of powers. Like, to me, it's too much of a wild coincidence for another kid to gain the powers the same way that Peter Parker does, or even a different way. But like, to me, it's a cheap way to recast Spider-Man, And I think that's really stupid.
Yeah.
It makes sense why there'd be two, like, another Superman, because Kryptonians all would react to the Earth's gravity and oxygen the same way because they come onto it with the same default set of biology. Again, like, more than one person can be Batman because Batman's just a man, and if you train hard enough and you know how to use all the gadgets, you could be Batman too.
Right.
But one of the things about Peter Parker is anyone could have been Spider-Man, but it's him.
Yeah, it's a little bit more random,
Yeah.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
That's what Dustin said that he liked about Peter Parker or Spider-Man as a character is like, it really could have been anybody, but it was him. I think that was more in response to, I think he said in Amazing Spider-Man 2, like, Peter finds out that there's something, it's not that the spider was radioactive, but he had radioactive blood. And he interpreted that to be like, it's kind of like the midichlorians in Star Wars. It's like, oh, not just anyone could be Spider-Man. It only could have been Peter. And he really hated the idea of that because it makes him unrelatable.
That was in the Amazing Spider-Man 2?
Yeah, that's one of the things that he finds.
I don't remember that.
That's one of the things that like Peter's dad was working on apparently, and Peter had radioactive blood. So if the spider had bitten someone else, nothing would have happened, except maybe some tissue loss or something like a normal spider bite.
Okay.
Yeah. So while Spider-Man could be anybody, I don't like that the same spider biting two different people. Not even the same spider, different spider. Like you see what I mean?
Yeah, because eventually it seems like they're going to replace Captain America with either the Winter Soldier or Falcon. And see, that works to me because Bucky has been around for many, many years, and Sam Wilson has been around for many, many years, so people know who they are.
Right.
So, and I just feel like bringing in Miles Morales is too soon, I think, because he's still establishing himself as a character. You know what I'm saying? So like, if they replace Captain America as either one of those characters, that works for me because those are established characters in the Marvel Universe. They've been around for decades. So
yeah, well, and also in the movies.
Right.
I'm glad they're going with Peter Parker because I think it'd be premature to go with Miles Morales right now.
Yeah.
Especially just to please a certain section of the audience, you know?
For me, I just trust Marvel, so if they were to make a Miles Morales version, I'm sure it'd be great.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure the Peter Parker is going to be great. So that's the way I look at it. It's for me, it could have been either character, and I'd be excited. But, I understand why they chose to go with Peter, because he's been around since, the 60s. So he has decades of brand recognition to his name,
Yeah.
That's the only reason I would have said it'd be smarter to go with Peter, because everyone knows who he is. He's been around for so long. So. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how many movies Sony is going to make with this Peter Parker. I mean, I guess we only know of just the one, but I assume there'll be three of them.
I think I read 3 for the solo films, and then I don't know about the others.
I'm sure he'll be in some of the Avengers films, and I bet he'll probably be a part of Infinity War.
Yeah, I would definitely think so. Yeah.
If not, he'll join this new crop of Avengers that'll probably pop up after the Infinity War. Like, I imagine he'll either be a part of the Avengers in those 2 films, or after. I mean, you and I share the same theory that after the Infinity War movies, the Avengers themselves will all be replaced. The Avengers as we know it. I mean, there's not going to be an Incredible Hulk, and Iron Man is not going to be in it. Or Robert or
every now and again.
Tony Stark will probably exit the movies, and so will Steve Rogers, and Thor might even also. And there's going to be, and they'll probably call them the New Avengers, kind of like in the comics, or the Ultimate Avengers. And that's going to be. I mean, we saw this at the end of Age of Ultron. They've already sort of got them, and I mean, it only after the main cast officially moves on, they'll probably throw this kid in there and it'll be like, hey, now it's Spider-Man's time to be part of the Avengers, just like he is in the comics. And Rhodey may not even be War Machine anymore. Maybe he'll wear the Iron Man armor. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, I'd be cool with that, because Rhodey's an established character too. So any one of these characters that gets replaced by another character, I'm down with that. Because all of these people are characters that have been established, Bucky and Falcon and all these characters. So but yeah, I think that they really made a good choice by bringing Spider-Man in, because he's just on name alone, he's probably the most popular Marvel character. So bringing him in as kind of a focus for the next wave of Avengers was really smart on their part. If Iron Man and Captain America and all these other characters get replaced or leave or whatever, you still have Spider-Man there to kind of bolster the whole thing. So, very good that they got him back. And obviously it's good because, I trust Marvel more than I do Sony to, keep the character's integrity and, not do stupid things like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So.
Yeah, I don't trust Sony as far as I can throw them.
Yeah.
And they're an intangible entity, so I can't throw them at all. Or they're a large building, which I also cannot throw at all. So I don't trust them at all.
Yeah. I think anything that Marvel does with Spider-Man will be better than Amazing Spider-Man. So, and I think it has a good chance of being better than the Sam Raimi films. I don't know. We'll have to see. But
I think they have that potential just because with Marvel's involvement, and also the involvement of perhaps other characters from the comic book universe, it will feel a little bit more like Spider-Man. But but it's the thing is, it has to have that same kind of feel. I mean, even Raimi, like even without Marvel, knew Peter Parker and understood his struggle. And so as long as the people making it understand that Peter Parker's life is horrible and depressing, basically, as long as they understand that, they understand Peter Parker. I mean, nothing goes right for him except for becoming Spider-Man. And even that is a net loss in terms of his life, you know? Like, the whole point of us watching Spider-Man is, wow, Spider-Man's awesome, but everything that comes with it is still bad. And as long as they understand that and don't try to make him this weird punk indie douchebag kid like Mark Webb did, then they should be fine, you know? Yeah.
I don't even think it was Mark Webb's fault, though. I think it was just
Kurtzman and Orsi.
The studio wanting it to be that way, you know?
Yeah.
Although I think Mark Webb was a weird choice always to direct those movies, but you know. And they also
here's what I've decided. What I've decided increasingly is that well, I don't know. I was gonna say it seems that the director no longer matters for these big action movies because so much of like their unique touch doesn't make the final cut. Like what makes the final cut is whoever did the visual effects and whoever did the stunt work and, you know, the casting. I was going to say that, but then, like, I don't know, could anyone else have made Guardians of the Galaxy with the same sensibilities as James Gunn? You know, we're about to find out if someone else could make the Avengers movies, you know, with the same kind of pop that Joss Whedon did. But I also fully trust the Russo brothers to make even better films. Joss seemed to make the Avengers films with a certain amount of bitterness, you know, after a while. So I'm hoping that they clearly are grateful for where they are. And Joss seemed to be a lot more pissy and complaining about having to work within the studio system because he's a free spirit or whatever. But, you know, so maybe they have some indie director doing, you know, the Spider-Man solo film. So I'd never heard of him, and he did some movies I'd never heard of. So maybe that's good, but hopefully he doesn't do what Joss did and basically go like, man, I don't like these suits telling me what to do.
Right.
I just want them to give me the money and let me do their thing.
I mean, I think a good example of that working is Colin Trevorrow, who directed Jurassic World.
Right.
He had done just like one small film before this.
Right.
And he was given kind of the keys to this, you know, Keystone franchise, and obviously it worked out really well. So, you know, I think a lot of studios are looking for that kind of director now. The director who hasn't done big films but can kind of bring something unique to the big films that gives the film character, you know? So, you know, but again, you could say the same with Mark Webb, and that didn't work out well. So,
yeah.
You know, I think it's just picking the right person for each brand, you know?
Well, yeah, and I think with Mark Webb, I mean, like we said, I think it was more the direction Sony decided to go in because even if Mark Webb was like a terrible director, if the studio had the right intentions, you'd still see it shine through. You'd still see. I mean, you have Garfield, who was excited to play Peter Parker and said all the right things about what he likes about him, and none of that was on the screen because none of that was in the script because the writers that Sony hired were a couple of people who. Do you remember when Kurtzman and Orsi, that name used to mean like this is going to be great, and just and now like I hear they're to me their box office poison, like the two of them, and Johnny Depp and Damon Lindelof and who else? Who's a director that's and M. Night Shyamalan. They all wear the same Letterman jackets now. The one that has like just a thumbs down on it. And maybe a skunk tail on it too. Marvel has the best intentions and has the right people, and I'm hoping that their involvement with this will sort of turn it around. And at the very, I mean, if we're going to make Spider-Man movies, if we can't stop making Spider-Man movies, let's at least make some good ones. And you know, I mean, now to be fair to myself, I felt this is exactly where I was a few years ago when they cast Andrew Garfield. I was like, hey, he looks the part, and he's a good actor, and hopefully everything is good. And then it turned out to be terrible. So hopefully the difference is Marvel.
But Andrew Garfield, I just never bought him as Peter Parker. Just even looks-wise, because to me, Peter Parker is a guy who's an outcast. He's an introverted guy who kind of keeps to himself, and he's kind of, you know, bullied and made fun of by everyone around him, really.
Right.
And I never bought Andrew Garfield as that person because obviously he's a very handsome fella, you know.
Well, he's handsome and his hair is done up trendy.
I never bought him as an outcast because he looks like, you know, a leading man actor.
Well, he looks like a Gap model, and he skateboards, which introverted, bullied people don't normally do. Like, perhaps, like you could now a skateboarder could call into the show and be like, "Hey, you know, I skateboard because I'm bullied because no one understands me, so I'm in my own little world." It's like, yeah, but that also takes a certain amount of confidence and coordination and a comfortability with yourself that Peter Parker doesn't have.
Yeah.
Peter Parker should be fairly insecure about basically everything he does, essentially.
Right.
And to have him doing all these lips and all this I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah, and like, say what, a lot of people hate on Tobey Maguire, but at least Tobey Maguire looks like someone who would be an outcast in high school.
Yeah.
You know, no offense to Tobey Maguire, but, you know.
But he looks like a nerd.
Basically, yeah, you know, and so the Tom Holland looks like someone who doesn't, you know, he looks like a normal kid. He doesn't look like, you know, Andrew Garfield, who, you know, he doesn't. There's a striking difference there. So, you know, I mean, it was just even the way that they handled Peter Parker's character in The Amazing Spider-Man, what he wore and how he acted and everything was just not in character to me. But you know.
Now, the reason Tobey Maguire would be an outcast in high school is because he looks too old to be in high school.
Right.
Are you?
I wonder how old he was when he did that movie.
What class do you teach? Oh, I'm a freshman. What? No, you're not.
So you were a TA.
Hang on. Let me. I'll look up that stat on his age. Right now, he's 40 years old. So okay. Spider-Man was 2002. So he was, let's see, 95. He was like 26, 27 maybe.
Yeah.
So, you know, the same age or a little younger than Garfield was.
Yeah. That's too old, I think. So
shit, it's his birthday today. He's 40 today.
Great news. Wow.
That's serendipitous.
Wow.
Well, John, do you have any closing thoughts about all this?
No, I'm excited to see how it all plays out, and you know, I'm hoping he doesn't have too big a role in Civil War, just because he hasn't been established yet, and I feel like that he's trimming Black Panther's screen time by being in the movie in the first place. So I'd rather see Black Panther play a bigger role in Civil War because I feel like that role was meant for him in the movie universe. And I feel like adding Spider-Man in takes away from him. So I don't want that. So hopefully they find a good balance of keeping him in the movie. But
well, and
you know,
also because they've just cast him, so whatever scenes were written for him were sort of placeholder scenes. And so if his interpretation of the character is too wildly different from the flow of the movie itself, it's going to show. Yeah. And I really don't want that. So I agree. I hope that his screen time is minimal.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a little weird if they go the route of the comic book and they have him take off his mask. I don't want them to do that because I think that it's going to have zero impact because we just met this kid.
Yeah.
It'll have no impact. So I don't mind that he's in the movie, but I do mind. You know what? I want him in the movie, but I don't want him as Spider-Man. You know what I mean? I don't want him to be out as Spider-Man. I want him to. Right. I don't want to see him in the costume at all. Like I want to see him be Peter Parker, but like be at like a press conference taking pictures or something, and and maybe ask a question to Tony Stark or something like, Mr. Stark, Peter Parker, Daily Bugle. Do you think that superheroes should have to, register and blah, blah, blah. Like, what about the ones who don't want to register? What happens, just incognito? And I want him to show up like at the end of the movie to Captain America and say, my name is Peter Parker, and like shoot a web or something and be like, I think I can help you.
I don't think that'll happen. That'd be ridiculous. But
yeah, but I don't want.
The costume would be a good like post-credit scene or something.
Yeah, or I don't know. I just don't want him to go like to stand up on stage and be like, and the costume be like, I've been talking about this and I feel like it's time to reveal myself. And it's like, boom. Because I'm just going to look at him and be like, okay, who the fuck are you?
Who are you?
Yeah. I'm Peter Parker. Oh, okay. Well, this is like the first time I've seen your face. So, yay, kind of.
Yeah.
Me and Dustin talked about this way back. Like, it's significant. You can't expect the audience to react based on just because a person took off the mask in front of a crowd. That person, we need to see them through their struggles. We need to have seen what they've gone through to keep their identity hidden. We need to see the sacrifices they've made to preserve their identity, because then it carries weight. So I don't want them to just follow the comic book like a carbon copy and go, ooh, no more masks, because it means nothing to me. It's meaningless.
I agree.
So,
and the Spider-Man, the issue, just having him in the movies to me is still up for grabs as far as I'm concerned, like, because I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all the characters, and it seems like they're introducing a lot of new characters right around now, who I feel like are going to get the short end of the stick, because a big name like Spider-Man is getting added in. I don't want to see characters like Black Panther or Ant-Man or any of these other characters, get less screen time because Spider-Man is suddenly available. So I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, hopefully they treat it more like the Harry Potter movies, where they come back and then there's Slughorn. There's just he's barely in the movie, but there's a few shots of him, and there's no grand shot that's like, oh, by the way, here's Slughorn again, and he has a few lines to remind you who he is. They just show him, and if you've been paying attention, you know who he is. So hopefully they treat it like that. Like if they're all having a meeting, Paul Rudd can sit there and talk to Daredevil and whatever, without him having to be like, my name is Matt Murdock, but some call me Daredevil, the devil of Hell's Kitchen. You don't have to do any of that. Just show them, and if we've been paying attention, then we know who they are, and we don't need to spend a lot of time introducing them and worrying about giving them all screen time, because at the end of the day, this is a Captain America movie, and Steve Rogers should be the protagonist, and we don't need to waste a bunch of time giving Spider-Man this big monologue about something about his feelings. I want his involvement to be as little as possible. I want him to essentially be a cameo.
Right, I agree with you. Yeah. I know Ant-Man and Black Panther are both going to be in Civil War. That's been confirmed. And other Scarlet Witch and War Machine and all these other characters are going to be in the movie also.
Yeah.
So, adding Spider-Man in, I don't want any of those characters to get shorted. That's all.
They need to just treat them like they look at every movie. It's almost like this might be the first or last time some people see these characters. They may not know, but it's like, I think at this point, when you essentially have been treating this whole story like a miniseries, you need to treat them like it's a TV episode. You don't have to reintroduce them every time. People have been watching in sequence, and you can just have Scarlet Witch jump in and zap somebody or do some stuff without having to re-demonstrate how her powers work.
Right, and I feel Marvel does that really, really well. So,
right.
Hopefully it doesn't feel jarring, but So speaking of Ant-Man too, I don't know if you read this, but I guess a bunch of the press saw Ant-Man. I think it was like yesterday or earlier this week, and apparently the buzz for it was really great. Good. Yeah, that's like a lot of people were tweeting. It's the best Marvel movie since I don't know what
Captain America.
But they said it was really, really well done, and they said a lot of people were tweeting better than Age of Ultron.
Well, I'm not really surprised, because that's a smaller story that focuses more on character, and it probably uses less visual effects, or less generic visual effects. So I'm not surprised that people like it better than Ultron. But I mean, that's good. I mean, I'm glad. I was going to go see it either way. I think it's good because this is a new character. So of course they're going to like it because they're not jaded. They're going to latch on to a new guy, and they're going to have a. So I'm glad. I'm glad it's good.
I think everyone was expecting Ant-Man to fail in some way, and you never know. Maybe it still doesn't do well at the box office. I think it will, but you never know. But I think Marvel's branching out, and it's good that they're taking, you know, these kind of risks with these characters that aren't nearly as famous, even as Iron Man was before the movie. So,
right.
You know, I think that's a good thing. You know, like Miss Marvel and Black Panther and these other characters. You know, I think that's good that they're folding them in. So,
right.
Captain Marvel, Black Panther, Ant-Man, the Inhumans. I think all that stuff is going to be beneficial to the whole universe. So, yeah, I think they're doing it right. So, I have hopes that they'll do Spider-Man right as well.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode. You know what? I'm just going to read all the other stuff in post later.
All right.
Say goodbye to the people, John.
Goodbye, people.
Thanks for listening, guys. You can find us on iTunes, search HooperCast, or on Podbean, hoopercastpod.podbean.com, or on Blogger, hoopercastpod.blogspot.com, or Tumblr, hoopercastpod.tumblr.com, or on YouTube, HooperCastPod. You can also follow us on Twitter at HooperCast. You can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/HooperCast, or you can send us an email at hoopercast@gmail.com. Later, nerds.